I moved into an old house at the edge of the woods, hoping to find peace after everything that happened. But the silence here was never empty. At night, I kept hearing voices calling my name from the trees. Each whisper sounded closer and too familiar. Until one night, I realized the voice calling me was my own. It happened last October, in a township that sits where the map turns green and the radio turns to static. I had just moved into a weather-beaten house at the Treeline, 2 miles past the county road and a lifetime away from the city I left after the divorce. I came alone. The realtor handed me the keys and a list of names for a plumber, an electrician, and a man everyone called Fix Joe, who knew how to mend anything except his own sentences. That was my entire welcome committee. The place was smaller than the photos, with a long porch that faced the woods and windows that had learned to rattle at the slightest breath of wind. There was a smell of damp wood and old smoke. Behind the house the trees crowded in, thin and tall, leaning like listeners. Someone had hung 2 rusted horseshoes over the back door. I left them there. On my second afternoon, a woman from the nearest house, a quarter mile down the gravel, walked up with a pie and a warning. Her name was Marlene, late 50s, red scarf, steady eyes. She asked the usual questions and then glanced toward the dark shade beyond the yard. After sundown, she said, "You let the woods be. The sound carries out here. People hear things." That was all. She did not smile. I thanked her, and when she turned to leave, I watched her pace quicken as the light slipped toward evening. I wanted to believe the quiet would help me. I stacked my boxes, fixed the porch light, ate cold dinner from a pan, and called no one. As the last color drained from the sky, a dull chill moved through the rooms. The house made its settling noises, a snap in the wall, a sigh under the floor, a faucet that shivered once and then stopped. I told myself this was what old houses did, and if I cataloged each sound, I would own it. I turned on a small lamp, opened a book, and read a paragraph 4 times without understanding any of it. At 9 I stepped outside to lock the truck. The night was bigger than I remembered. The kind that feels full, as if something enormous is holding its breath. The beam from my flashlight went only so far and then seemed to weaken in the air, swallowed by the trees. Dry leaves skittered across the steps. Somewhere to my left a branch cracked, simple as a pencil breaking. I held the light and listened until the silence turned into a pressure against my skin. Back inside, I checked the doors twice and the windows once. I laid out a sleeping bag on the front room floor because the bed frame was still in pieces. I left the lamp on. The clock on the stove blinked midnight, though it was barely 10. It must have lost power earlier. I told myself I would fix it in the morning, add it to a list, feel useful. I drifted towards sleep and then surfaced fast, heart kicking. The house felt different, like someone had changed the angle of it. The lamp still glowed, but the room looked thinner, stretched by a long, quiet pole. I could hear the wind through the soffits, and underneath that, a soft grainy hush, like radio snow. I lay still and waited for the usual culprit, a mouse in the wall, a loose shingle, the furnace clicking awake. The hush gathered into a thread of sound, and the thread began to take shape. From the porch, or just beyond it, something said my name. It was not a voice I recognized, but it was not strange either. It was the way a stranger might say your name after reading it from a badge. Careful, almost polite. I did not move. I told myself it was a trick of the wind in the gutter, the syllables of my name pulled out of air. I counted to 10 and then to 30, felt foolish at 40, sat up at 50. The room swayed once and steadied. I turned the lamp off and stood in the dark. The dark in that house was honest. It had weight. I crossed the floor, slow enough to keep the boards from complaining, and pressed my ear to the door. The night was a bowl and the house was at the bottom of it. The bowl held every sound, the long breath of the trees, the scrape of a loose porch chain, a far coyote stitching the fields together with its thin thread of a call. Then it came again, closer this time, like a whisper sent from a cupped hand. My name. I unlocked the deadbolt before I could think better of it, opened the door a hand's width, and felt the chill step onto my toes. The porch boards were gray as bone. Beyond the rails, the yard was a darker shape against a sky that had misplaced the moon. My breath fogged and drifted away in a small gray ribbon. The smell of wet leaf and iron was heavy. "Hello," I called, and heard how small I sounded. "Who is that?" The answer came from the trees to the right, level with the porch steps, too clear to be the wind and too soft to belong to anyone trying to scare me. The tone was even, the way you speak to a skittish dog. "We see you." I could feel the house behind me like a person standing at my back. A habit I did not know I had made me glance at the porch light switch. It worked earlier. I flipped it and nothing changed. I flipped it again. The bulb stayed cold. I stepped onto the top stair and shined my flashlight into the yard. The beam found the old bird bath, the stump near the fence, the twist of blackberry cane climbing the post. The light caught a smear of silver on the grass, and for a second I thought it was metal, but it was only a strip of wet leaf flashing its belly. The trees took the light and made nothing from it. I said my name out loud, to hear how it sounded in that place. It seemed to go nowhere, as if the air had no surface to bounce from. I stood there until the cold got into my wrists and my jaw started to ache. I told the dark, "I have a phone," as if that were a threat. The dark did not argue. Then, from farther back, the voice tried my name again, and this time another voice breathed along with it, as if learning the pace. They fell slightly out of unison on the last syllable, like two people reading from the same line in poor light. I stepped back into the house and shut the door. I did not lock it immediately, not out of bravery but because I wanted to hear the latch catch the frame. The sound felt like proof. I slid the bolt and leaned my head against the wood, listening to the quiet rebuild itself piece by piece. Somewhere, the refrigerator hummed. The clock on the stove blinked a new wrong time. I left the lamp on again. I unrolled the sleeping bag and lay down without removing my shoes. I thought about Marlene, about her eyes tracking the tree-line while she told me to let the woods be. People hear things. The phrase had sounded quaint that afternoon, a small-town superstition, something baked into a church cookbook between recipes for custard and beet salad. Now it sounded like a rule carved into the inside of a coffin lid. I told myself, not out loud, that tomorrow I would go to the hardware store for new bulbs, buy a second lock, fix the rattling vent, find a radio station that did not dissolve when the wind rose. I promised myself the morning would be ordinary. It is a small trick but it sometimes works. Make a list, anchor the day. Sleep came in thin strips. I woke once with the certain sense that the lamp had dimmed, though it still glowed. I woke again sure someone had stood at the window and stepped away the moment my eyes opened. The last time I woke, just before dawn, the house was full of a soft, grainy static. It receded as the first light came in. When the sun finally touched the porch, the yard looked like nothing had ever happened to it. The bird bath was only a chipped bowl on a crooked pedestal. The blackberry cane was only a weed that hurts. The horseshoes over the back door were still rusted in their same old failure. I told myself I had dreamed what I heard. That afternoon I bought batteries, bulbs, and a cheap digital recorder. That night, when I set the recorder on the porch rail and pressed the red button, the woods gave me its answer before I could ask my question. "We see you." The second night came colder, like the air itself had learned something about me. The house creaked earlier than usual, as if bracing for another long watch. I had bought a small digital recorder from the hardware store in town, the kind meant for lectures or meetings, not hauntings. I told myself it was for proof, not protection. Proof that what I heard wasn't real. That was the point, catch silence, play it back, and feel foolish for believing otherwise. I set the recorder on the porch rail just before dusk. The sky had turned the color of rusted steel, and a wind pressed through the woods in slow, heavy breaths. I hit record, said the date, said my name, and went back inside. The house felt like a lid closing. Every sound, clock, faucet, the hiss of air in the vents, seemed too deliberate. I sat at the table and waited for nothing to happen. By morning, frost had silvered the windows. I found the recorder exactly where I'd left it. The battery indicator blinked red, almost dead. I pressed play while making coffee. The first few minutes were just wind, steady, wide, harmless. Then came the scrape of leaves across the porch, the groan of a nail shifting in the wood. I was about to stop it when I heard my name. It was faint, buried in static, but it was there. The same careful tone as before. Then again, closer. And then a child's voice, thin, uncertain, whispering something that froze me in place. "Come back." The words didn't match the rhythm of the wind. They had pauses, breaths, meaning. I replayed the clip over and over until the batteries gave out. My coffee went cold. Around noon, I walked the property line, the recorder in my pocket like a loaded weapon I couldn't use. The woods were quiet, too quiet for birds or distant chainsaws. About 100 feet from the porch, near a half-buried fence post, something caught the light. It was an old bicycle frame, tangled in roots and moss, its wheels long gone. The handlebar grips had melted into the metal, the seat torn open by age. It looked like it had been there for decades. I took a photo, meaning to show someone later, though I didn't know who. When I returned, Marlene was outside, hanging laundry on a wire strung between two apple trees. She waved me over. I told her about the bike, about how strange it was to find something like that so deep in. Her face changed. The wind caught her scarf, but she didn't move to fix it. "There used to be a boy," she said. "Lived where you do now. He went missing one summer. Search parties for weeks, dogs, posters, the whole thing. They never found him." "What was his name?" I asked, though I already felt the answer coming. She hesitated, looked past me toward the trees. "Same as yours," she said quietly. "That's what people still talk about." I didn't remember much of what we said after that. My hands were shaking when I went home. That evening, I sat in front of my laptop and opened the audio again. I adjusted the playback speed, filtered the noise, and listened through headphones. Between each whisper there was breathing, not one set, but two. A smaller rhythm shadowing the first. At the 23-minute mark, a distortion surged, like a microphone brushing fabric. Then, faintly, a humming tune, off-key, the kind a child might sing to keep from crying. When I tried to save the file, the laptop froze. The screen flickered, then went black. When it came back, the recording was gone. Only a single new folder remained on the desktop, untitled. Inside it, one audio clip, 10 seconds long. I played it. My name, again, repeated twice. Then silence. That night I decided to leave the recorder running inside. I placed it on the kitchen counter before bed. I remember thinking that no sound could pass through those thick walls. But at 3 in the morning I woke to the soft click of plastic, the recorder button pressing down on its own. The small red light blinked in the dark. The air was colder than before, like the house had stopped breathing. I pulled the blanket up and listened. There was a sound beneath the hum of the fridge, like someone dragging a finger along the wall. Then a whisper, so close it could have come from inside the room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, frightened, familiar. When dawn came, I didn't check the recording right away. I waited until the light was steady. I brewed coffee, though my hands trembled enough to spill half of it. The recorder was still warm. I sat by the window and pressed play. The first part was uneventful, breathing, footsteps, my own shifting in sleep. Then came that sound again, the dragging. It lasted nearly a minute. And then the whisper, clear now, unmistakable. "Please, come back." Followed by another voice, lower, distant, answering, he already did. I stopped the playback. My breath felt too loud. I looked toward the porch window, half expecting to see movement. But there was only the tree-line, still and gray. When I opened the door later, the recorder fell from my hand and cracked against the wood. Because on the step, where the frost had melted unevenly, were small footprints. Bare. Child-sized. They started from the yard and ended right at my door. The third day felt longer than it should have. The air around the house seemed heavy, as if the world was holding back a storm that never came. I hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. Each time my eyes closed, I'd hear that same whisper, stretched, distant, coming from somewhere behind my thoughts. It didn't sound threatening anymore. It sounded patient. By afternoon, I made up my mind to go into the woods. I told myself it was curiosity, but deep down I wanted proof that there was something real, something tangible, behind the voices. Maybe I thought if I could find the source, I could end it. The air was still, and the trees stood like a wall of black ribs. I packed a flashlight, the half-broken recorder, and my phone for photos. The signal was gone as soon as I stepped past the property line. The ground was soft, the leaves wet, and the deeper I went, the quieter the world became. No birds. No insects. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something odd, a narrow trail, barely visible under a layer of pine needles, cutting through the undergrowth. It wasn't on the property map. It didn't even look like a path at first, more like a thin scar through the forest floor. I followed it. Every few steps I'd hear something faint behind me. Not footsteps exactly, more like the weight of air shifting when someone moves close. I kept turning around, expecting to catch a glimpse of an animal. Nothing. Just trees, straight and endless, watching. After a while, I reached a small clearing. The ground dipped slightly, and in the center stood an old tree with a thick trunk and roots like coiled ropes. On the bark, about shoulder height, were carved symbols, uneven, human-made, but impossible to read. Circles, crossed lines, and one shape that looked like an open eye. The marks were old, the edges softened by time. But one of them looked newer, as if scratched just days ago. When I leaned closer, I saw something else, strands of hair tangled in the rough bark, pale, thin, and caught in the resin. My stomach twisted. I stepped back and turned to leave, but the forest had changed. The trail behind me was gone, swallowed by the undergrowth. That's when I heard it again. My name. It came from behind the tree, soft, uncertain, like a voice learning how to speak. I froze. The sound came again, from farther away this time, deeper in the woods. Don't look back. The voice was mine. Exactly mine. The tone, the breath, everything. I spun around, flashlight trembling, catching flashes of trunks, branches, mist. No one was there. But I could feel the air moving against my skin, as if something had passed inches from me. I started walking fast, then faster, though I couldn't tell where I was going. The compass on my phone spun wildly. The forest thickened, branches clawing at my jacket. Every few steps I'd see shapes in the fog, silhouettes that vanished when I blinked. At one point I stumbled and dropped the recorder. When I picked it up, it was already on. The red light blinked, and through its tiny speaker came a faint voice whispering something over and over, "Stay with us." The ground sloped downward, and the trees began to thin. I could see a pale light ahead, not bright enough to be daylight, not warm enough to be fire. It pulsed slowly, like breathing. I followed it until I reached what looked like the remains of an old wooden fence, half buried in moss. Behind it, the faint outline of a structure, maybe a shed or cabin, leaned against the hill. The door was gone, just a frame leading into darkness. Inside, the air smelled of earth and old water. My flashlight caught a collapsed roof beam, broken planks, and in the corner, something that made my throat tighten, a child's shoe, small, mud-caked, its laces knotted tight. I didn't want to believe it, but something about that shoe felt familiar. Like I'd seen it before. Maybe in a photo. Maybe in a dream. The recorder clicked again, louder this time. The sound distorted, filled with static. Then, underneath the noise, came a small voice saying, "You remember, don't you?" I dropped it. The sound echoed through the cabin, hitting the hollow wood like a heartbeat. The fog pressed in through the doorway, curling around the floor. I grabbed the recorder and ran. I didn't care where, I just needed to get back to open ground. The forest seemed to stretch farther than before, as if the way out had been pulled away an inch at a time. By the time I saw the clearing near my house again, the sun was already low. I stumbled through the yard, breath ragged, clothes wet with sweat and dirt. When I reached the porch, I turned around once more. The woods stood silent, motionless, pretending to be nothing but trees. Inside, I played back the new recording. Most of it was noise, static, wind, my own panicked breathing. But toward the end, a pattern emerged. My voice again, calm, distant, whispering something I didn't remember saying. "You shouldn't have come back." Then silence. And at the very last second, a faint sound like footsteps leading through the brush, going deeper into the woods. I didn't go outside again that night. I locked the doors, closed every curtain, and sat on the floor with the recorder in my hands, replaying the same line until the words stopped sounding human. When morning came, I walked outside to find new footprints in the dirt. Smaller than mine. Bare. They led from the forest to the base of the porch, and then vanished, as if the person had stepped into the air and disappeared. The morning after I found the footprints, the world outside looked clean again, washed by the night rain, the soil dark and smooth. For a few seconds, I almost believed nothing had happened. The woods were quiet, the air heavy with fog, and the ground glistened with dew. But then I saw the patch of sunken earth near the old shed. It hadn't been there before. At first, I thought the rain had softened the soil and made it collapse. But when I walked closer, I realized the ground had caved in along a straight line, almost like the outline of a rectangle. I grabbed a shovel from the porch and began to dig, more from instinct than intention. The deeper I went, the colder the air felt. The smell changed, damp earth mixed with something older, metallic, forgotten. About half a meter down, the shovel hit something solid. I crouched and brushed away the dirt with my hands. It was a stone slab, smooth but cracked through the middle. The surface had faint letters carved into it, eroded by time but still legible enough to make my breath stop. It was a name, my name. I fell back, staring at it. The letters looked carved by hand, not machine, uneven but deliberate. Below the name, a date I could barely make out, 1993 to 2001. I was born in 1993. The math hit me slowly, like an echo. Whoever the stone belonged to had died at 8 years old. I didn't touch it again. I covered it halfway and sat on the porch until dusk, trying to think of any rational explanation. Coincidence? A family name? Some cruel joke from whoever owned this place before? Anything but what my mind was starting to whisper. That night, I couldn't stay inside. Every sound made the house feel smaller. I went to the town library the next morning, a brick building with yellowed blinds and the faint smell of mildew. The woman at the front desk pointed me toward the archives. Old newspapers, stored on microfilm. I spent hours scrolling through years of local stories until one headline stopped me cold. Local boy still missing, search continues into third week. The date was from the summer of 2001. The article described a boy who disappeared from a small house at the edge of the woods. He was last seen playing with a blue bicycle. The photo was black and white, grainy, but clear enough that I could see his face. My face. It wasn't just resemblance, it was identical. The same scar under the chin, the same eyes. I read the line again and again until the letters blurred. The boy's name was mine. According to the article, the search had ended without answers. No remains, no sign of a struggle. Just a single witness, an old man who claimed to have heard a voice calling the boy's name deep in the woods before the sound stopped abruptly. The police called it unreliable. I printed the page and brought it home. It felt heavier than paper. That night, I listened to the recordings again. On the last one, the static seemed to pulse in a rhythm, like breathing. I increased the volume, and under the hiss, I heard a faint voice repeating something. It wasn't the child's voice anymore, it was mine. The same tone I used when recording diary notes or talking to myself in empty rooms. But these words were different. You found it. The wind outside began to rise. I turned off the playback and looked toward the back door. Through the window, I could see the shed, and behind it, the spot where I had unearthed the gravestone. The soil was still disturbed, darker than the rest. When I stepped outside, the air was motionless. The woods looked wrong, as if every tree had turned slightly while I wasn't watching. I moved toward the shed, each step feeling slower than the last. When I reached the grave, I noticed something new, small impressions in the mud, like fingerprints dragged across the surface. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. The soil began to shift, as if something beneath it was moving. I stumbled back, heart pounding. For a moment, I thought I saw the outline of a hand press against the ground from below. Then everything went still. I ran inside and locked the door. I sat against the wall until morning, listening for sounds that never came. By daylight, the grave was calm again. No marks, no movement. Just a patch of dark soil, silent and cold. I told myself I'd imagined it. That grief, fear, or isolation could make anyone see things that weren't there. But deep down, I didn't believe that anymore. I went back to the library that afternoon. The same woman was at the desk. When I asked if she had records of the property, she looked uneasy but agreed to check. After a few minutes, she returned with a thin folder. The deed listed the house under several different owners over the decades, all short stays. The last owner before me was an older woman who had died 3 years ago. Her name, Marlene Cray. I left without speaking to her. The moment I reached home, I saw her house through the trees, empty, shutters closed. She had warned me, and I hadn't understood. That evening, as the light faded, I noticed my reflection in the kitchen window. It looked normal at first, then wrong. The face was mine, but younger. Mud streaked across the cheek, a small cut on the chin. The reflection blinked slower than I did. I stepped back. The image stayed still for half a second too long before moving. The lamp flickered. A faint whisper drifted through the vents. "You finally came back." I didn't move. My breath fogged the glass, and for the briefest instant, I saw another shape standing behind me in the reflection, small, thin, with eyes too wide for its face. When I turned around, the room was empty. Only the recorder lay on the counter, blinking red, recording on its own again. I pressed stop, but it kept going. I didn't sleep after that night. The whisper in the vent hadn't stopped, it only changed. It no longer called my name, it repeated short sentences, fragments of thoughts that weren't mine. "He knows now. He remembers. He's coming back." The words bled through the walls like water. By sunrise, I had packed a small bag. I told myself I was leaving, today, right now. The house, the woods, the voices, they could all rot behind me. But when I walked out to the truck, the keys were gone. I checked the porch, the counter, my pockets, everywhere. Nothing. Then I saw the back door slowly swing open, as if pushed from the inside. The air that came out was cold enough to bite my throat. Inside, the recorder sat on the table, already on. The red light blinked faster than it ever had. The speaker hissed softly, and beneath it, my own voice whispered, "You can't leave yet." I froze. My voice, the tone, the breath, it was unmistakable. I replayed the memory of the night before, searching for a moment when I could have said it. There was none. The whisper came again, now from the hallway. "You forgot me." I grabbed the recorder and followed the sound. Each step down the hallway felt heavier, the floorboards moaning underfoot. The walls seemed closer than before, the air too dense to breathe. The voice led me toward the back door, out into the cold. The sky had turned gray, the kind of color that kills all distance. The trees looked frozen in place, every branch rigid. The ground was soft from rain. The spot where I had uncovered the gravestone was now completely bare, no mound, no stone, nothing. But in the center of the yard, the soil was fresh, darker than the rest, and shaped like a small circle. Something shimmered faintly in the mud. I knelt down. It was the metal casing of my truck keys, half buried. When I reached for them, I noticed the ground was warm. A faint hum rose from underneath, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. I stood up, dizzy. The air pressed against my ears, and I heard the whisper again, all around me this time, layered with others, a dozen voices, maybe more, all whispering in the same broken rhythm. Come back. Come back. Come back. The woods began to shift. I could see movement between the trees, shadows passing, faces that flickered in and out like static. I stumbled backward toward the porch. My hand brushed the recorder, still running. From the speaker came the sound of footsteps, mine, moving closer, followed by a faint child's laugh. And then, from the tree lean, he stepped out. He was small, thin, maybe 8 years old. His clothes were soaked in mud, one shoe missing. His face was pale and soft, his hair clinging to his forehead. But the eyes were mine. The same color, the same scar below the left one. He didn't blink. I couldn't speak. Every part of me screamed to move, but I was rooted. He tilted his head, watching me like someone studying their reflection for the first time. You took my place, he said quietly. His voice trembled, but not with fear. You left me there. I shook my head. No, I managed to say, though my voice sounded wrong, small, like it came from the walls instead of my mouth. That's not possible. He took a step forward, bare feet pressing into the wet earth. You were supposed to stay. A gust of wind swept through the yard, bending the trees. The air filled with whispers again, circling us like smoke. The boy pointed toward the woods. You went too far. And when you came back, it wasn't you anymore. I looked down at my hands. The skin was pale, almost translucent. My breath no longer fogged the air. The truth hit like a physical blow. The missing boy wasn't someone else. It was me. The memories that didn't fit, the unease since moving in, the familiarity of the house, the déjà vu at every corner, they all slid into place. I hadn't moved into this house. I had returned to it. The boy stepped closer, his face only inches from mine now. You remember, he whispered. The water. The trees. The dark. I saw flashes, the creak behind the old fence, the fog rolling in that summer afternoon, my bicycle slipping on wet ground, the fall, the silence. I saw myself sinking, the world above turning to light and noise. And then the woods whispering my name for years after, waiting for me to answer. He reached out and touched my arm. His hand was cold but solid. It's time to go back, he said. The wind stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. The ground beneath my feet softened, and for a moment, I felt weightless. The boy smiled, a small, tired smile, and the air around us shimmered. When I blinked, I was standing in the woods again, near the old tree with the carved symbols. The fog was thicker now, heavy and wet. The recorder lay in the dirt beside me, still running. I picked it up and pressed it to my ear. My own voice came through the static, calm, resigned. If you find this, it said, don't answer when the woods call your name. It's not an echo. It's an invitation. The sound faded. I looked down at my hands again. They were smaller, the skin softer, the fingernails rimmed with mud. The clothes on me weren't mine. The trees around me began to move, slow and deliberate, as if turning to face me. From the distance, a faint light glowed, the shape of a house through the fog, its windows flickering. I started walking toward it. Each step felt both new and remembered. When I reached the edge of the yard, the porch light came on. A man stood there, holding a small recorder, his eyes wide with confusion. I opened my mouth to speak, but the voice that came out wasn't mine anymore. Don't look back, I said. Then everything went quiet. The next morning, the house was empty. The doors unlocked. The truck still parked by the porch, keys sitting on the table. Only the recorder remained, its battery drained, its screen cracked. When the police later played the recovered audio, they heard breathing, a faint voice, and then the final words, soft, calm, certain. We found him.